everyone, welcome to Prime Performance In-Season Training Seminar. Today we're going to talk about the way we view training athletes in season. There's a lot of things we're going to cover. More importantly, there's going to be quotes by trainers at your favorite universities, and that's really important to highlight because these are the things that they're doing. So first off, thanks. Thanks to the people who contributed to this with their quotes, also the strength coaches, all the people who have contributed to my career and the knowledge that you've given me. So I want to go ahead and shout out to all those people to say thank you. So obviously we're going to be talking about our in-season training seminar. The things that we use in our program is our own specific system called the Prime 5 training system. And what we're doing when we train our athletes is we're trying to integrate different systemic qualities, and we're trying to make sure that we improve not only just the neuromuscular system, but also the way the body can potentially filter out toxins, also the way it utilizes different macronutrients in the body. So it goes into way more depth than what a lot of people actually want to talk about. Today we're going to dive into a little bit about what we do. Some of the things that we'll be covering is the autonomic nervous system, zone of apposition or breathing, muscle firing patterns, joint articulations and kinematics, cellular adaptations, fundamental exercise patterns, effects of sports on being a human, residual training effects, maintaining off-season progress and programming, and finally recovery strategies. This is a quote from Daniel Roos, University of Texas Basketball Strength and Conditioning. In-season training is a vital and often overlooked training block in the grand scheme of overall athletic development. It represents the longest continuous training time in the yearly training cycle. To not take full advantage of it is quite a disservice to an athlete. Through the planned manipulation of volume and intensity, strength can not only be maintained but gained due to the length of the training block. This is actually one of my strength coaches at Marshall University. This basically sums up a lot of what we're trying to do as strength coaches in season. We're not just trying to maintain what we did, we're trying to actually improve. So the thing that we're going to look at, we look at very heavily here is what state is our human in. There's this thing called an autonomic nervous system, and we need to really appreciate it because this is life. This is how we balance things. Now, if we're too stressed, we may not get the training effect we want, and if we're not amped up enough for our workout, we may not be able to move the loads or create the intensity we need to build intent and other qualities with our training. So talk about the autonomic nervous system, we have to appreciate the fight or flight. Now, so this is the sympathetic nervous system. This is what it feels like when you are overdriven. So imagine you were either trying to kill something through a chase to survive, or you're trying to escape so that you can survive. Some of the things that you'll experience with sympathetic stress is increased heart rate, greater energy expenditure, you'll feel excited, you'll have a neuroreflexive extended posture, which basically means you get amped up and some people call it hulking. You can experience, if you're in sympathetic stress too long, something called distress. That is a more negative type of stress that a human can endure. And the breathing patterns that will represent from this type of nervousness is inhalation. So you'll see an excessive rate of inhalation. So for instance, your athletes will start pulling in air, and if they're doing that for too long, you can expect for pain and other symptoms to follow. The next one is our parasympathetic. So this is our rest and digest. So this is something that you should experience post-workout. So that way, you can really use the nutrients that you've taken throughout the day or your post-workout meal, and this will really start kick-starting your recovery. What you'll experience in this type of system is going to be lower heart rate, lower energy expenditure. You'll feel a state of calmness. Sometimes if you're in a parasympathetic state for a good amount of time, you'll feel euphoric. So the parasympathetic will be represented in posture by more of a more neutral or slightly flexed position. So we can look at the bottom and it's more of an exhalated state where you exhale, ribs drop, diaphragm expands, obliques kick in, so a lot of good stuff comes from that. And like I said, you'll experience more euphoric, which is the same word as eustrous. So this is a quote I got from Charles Scott Sherrington. With the nervous system enact the reaction of the various parts of the system, the simple reflexes are ever combined into the greater unitary harmonies, actions in which the sequence one upon another constitutes their continuity, what may be termed the behavior. So basically anything that your nervous system is taking in is information, and there's going to be a neuroreflexive response. It can either be from your body, it can be behavior, it could be outlook. So the way we receive different stresses is, everything is going to have a reflex. There's going to be some representation of the stress that we feel. So I feel like this is a great quote. It's a little lengthy and a little wordy, but for me it makes a lot of sense, because however things are in people's lives are going to be how their body is going to reflex. So there's supposed to be a slide before this one. Basically, anything about the zone of apposition, I have to thank PRI for. The anatomy of breathing in asymmetrical humans is just phenomenal. So if you haven't had any reading or research on that, please look at it. It's a real game changer. So the zone of apposition, or ZOA, is the area of the diaphragm encompassing the cylindrical portion which corresponds to the portion directly opposed to the inner aspect of the lower rib. The ZOA is important because it's controlled by the abdominal muscles and directs diaphragmatic tension. So what this quote from Kendall really means is that when the diaphragm is acting appropriately, it's going to pull air in and out, and it's going to direct tension through the core, through the ribs in an appropriate manner that's going to allow the human to breathe with very little effort. So like I said, all credit about this stuff goes to Ron Hruska and Postural Restoration Institute. So we're going to talk about a suboptimal ZOA. So that's really the ZOA, to make this really simple, is the way your pelvic floor and the way your diaphragm communicate and work together. So a suboptimal ZOA is going to it's going to have a reflexive sympathetic state. It's inefficient respiration, so you're stuck in a state of inhalation. As you can see, this diaphragm should be a little bit more domed, a little bit longer downward, and less open. So what this really reflects is someone stuck in a state of inhalation. So what happens from this state of over-inhalation, or 2-to-1 ratio of inhalation-exhalation, is going to be decreased exercise tolerance, decreased intra-abdominal pressure. That's your ability to maybe feed forward energy. Shortness of breath, decreased function of the diaphragm, increased accessory breathing, which is like using neck or lower back muscles. Poor core control, which, think about this, if you don't breathe well and we put you underneath the bar for a squat, your squatting is really going to suffer, and something's going to pay for it. So increased lordosis, anterior pelvic tilt, hamstring and abdominal length, rib elevation, paraspinal use. So basically what's going to happen is this breathing pattern is going to take a toll on the spine, and what it will do is actually alter the shape. So the way that it's supposed to articulate, it's not going to happen. So you may get some vertebrae starting to tip each other, little vertebrae fractures, anterior slips of discs. So a lot of stuff can come from that. Lower back pain, SI joint pain, headaches, and you see a lot of people with asthma with this representation. So now we're going to talk about an optimal ZOA. It's a reflex of a parasympathetic state or exhalation. So the way I always talk to my athletes about exhalation is, think about what happens when your parents come home from work. Do you see them go, man, that was a long day of work, and just suck in air? Or you see them go, that's a long day of work, and give a nice body clearing exhale. So it's something we have to remember. We can also control a lot of stuff if we can enter this state. So efficient respiration. So we're going to talk about the ability to gain weight. For me, if someone's respirating appropriately, they're going to use less of their body to breathe, which means to me they're going to be burning less calories. For me, for guys that are trying to gain weight that play power sports, this could be a big game changer. Increase exercise tolerance, so you can actually go harder and go longer. Increase intra-abdominal pressure, you can feed more ruthlessness into your system and move more weight. Increased function of diaphragm, appropriate breathing patterns, enabled core control. For me, this is huge because you want your limbs to work correctly at each joint. Well, if your core is not in position, you're going to struggle to maintain your postures throughout exercise and throughout sport. So what we'll also have is decreased lordosis, which means you'll actually have the appropriate amount of lordotic curve in the lower back. And as you see here, the diaphragm is more domed and candy cane shaped, which means, you know, this guy's in a state of exhalation, which he's resting and digesting. Really cool thing about this is, you know, this is not just going to increase your performance, it's going to increase your health. So, you know, there's actually been instances of lowered pH in the body. Someone goes from an acidic state to a more alkaline state. It's really great stuff. The increased parasympathetic activity and decreased sympathetic activity were observed in slow breathing group, whereas no significant change in autonomic functions was observed in the fast breathing group. For me, this really means it's not just about exhaling, it's about controlling the tempo of getting the air out and also the tempo of getting air in. Because to me, everything is reflexive. If someone is pulling in air at a great rate, that obviously means they're really stressed. If someone's able to pull in air slowly, to me, they're breathing. They're not overworking to get what they need. So these are actually copyright techniques from Postural Restoration Institute. This is our ZOA techniques. So I would refer to these, or these things are everywhere online. So basically what you do is number 1, number 2, and number 3 in order. Basically what we're trying to do is get hamstring, inner thigh, diaphragm, and some rib work built into all this just through breathing. This comes from an associate of mine that I met at a PRI seminar. His name's Jeff Wood. He is the assistant director of sports medicine at University of Tennessee. His quote goes as, "Training and continuing is like a conditioning is like a bank account. Off-season training is the time you spend making your deposits into your account. Once you go into the season and compete, you are making steady withdrawals from your account. In-season training is like continuing to make small deposits throughout the season. If you only make withdrawals and no deposits, by the end of the season, your account will be empty. This is the time that performance can suffer and injuries can occur. In-season training is wise investment strategy." So the next thing we're going to talk about is some reflexive performance resets. So muscle firing patterns are huge. We're not going to go into any real techniques to help fix it. We'll talk quickly about zone 1 and how you can manipulate it to get a quick reset, and it could help you feel better almost immediately. So this information comes from 2 sources. One is Douglas Heel out of South Africa, and then RPR, which is a local organization here in the United States. So human muscle firing pattern refers, if you really want to understand how it works, you're going to need to refer to the previous slide. So the way it works is, if we go back to the previous slide, the muscles really fire from zone 1, zone 2 to zone 3. And if we're going to get really specific, the zone 2 that we're going to cover first will be the lower extremity zone 2 to lower extremity zone 3, and then that energy is going to come back up to zone 2, zone 3, upper extremities. And the reason it works like that is because we use the ground to create energy and propulsion. So if we're going to fire muscles and we're going to fire and we're going to move, we're going to propel something or ourselves. Muscle firing pattern should be an explosion. So that means firing outward. An implosion would be firing inward. So what you'll see from this, if your muscles fire in order, so 1, 2, 3, so this would be what we call a glute firing pattern. So the very first thing to kick in when you go to move should be your glute. Secondly, your hamstring, and third is your contralateral QL or lower back. So if we can get someone to start firing their muscles in order, they're going to use less energy to fire, and they're actually going to create better leverages and mechanical advantages at their joints, so that way they can lift more weight, they can run faster, they can recover better, and they'll actually be more mobile. So this is a very parasympathetic activity. When a muscle in the chain fires out of order and or becomes the dominant driver for a movement, it'll cause decreased performance and recoverability, increased pain, discomfort, and likelihood for injury over time. Like I said, these ideas and concepts come from Douglas Heel and RPR. So this is a picture of Brian Shaw. He's out of Colorado. He's one of the world's strongest men. He uses RPR, and he's deadlifting a significant amount of weight. So we're going to talk about quick zone resets. The very first one, you're going to rub your sternum and your bottom ribs while you're belly breathing. So what that's going to do is going to help activate your diaphragm. Secondly, you're going to fire your belly button, go an inch over, an inch down on either side. You're going to push in and try to scoop out that area, or rub hard circles. What that's going to do, it's going to activate your psoas and contribute to the health of hip flexion and the ability to use more hip flexion. The next thing we're going to do is rub our suboccipital ridge and right below the ear and behind the jaw, and that's really going to help your hip extension, your glute firing. There are so many resets in the body that I'm not going to cover. This isn't really for me to tell you, but the classes out there are phenomenal, and we use these with our guys that experience pain, decreased performance, and we see instant changes all the time. So the next thing we're going to talk about is discovering your joints. So joint articulations is a really big thing, because you're not going to have immediate ramifications all the time, but like Jeff Wood said, you're going to be making withdrawals and deposits, and if you're constantly making deposits or withdrawals from a joint and it's not working correctly, in time the tissue is going to fail. Things are going to seize up, and you're going to be on the bench, or you're going to be in the train room a lot more than you should be, simply because you can't use your entire joint, or you're not using your joint correctly. So this is a picture of a joint capsule, and the joint capsule is vital to the function of synovial joints. It seals the joint space, provides passive stability by limiting movements, provides active stability via its proprioceptive nerve endings, and may form articular surfaces for the joint. It is a dense fibrous connective tissue that is attached to the bone via specialized attachment zones and forms a sleeve around the joint. It varies in thickness according to the stresses to which it is subjected. It is locally thickened to form capsular ligaments, and may also incorporate tendons. So for what this means to me is that the capsule is basically the way the joint encases itself. And what happens, and we can't really look at capsule as anything other than just another tissue in the body that is continuous with another tissue. So what that means is bone is really ligament, really becomes tendon, and tendon becomes muscle. So we could look at, the Thomas Myers idea, where we're looking at one muscle pouring into 1,000 pockets versus 1,000 pockets filled with muscle. So to me, it's just, our body is one continuous piece of tissue where it picks up stress, and stability is a different story. So joint articulation or joint is usually formed of fibrous connective tissue and cartilage. Joints are grouped according to their motion. A ball and socket joint, a hinge joint, a condyloid joint, in a pivot joint, gliding joint, and a saddle joint. So there's so many different joints in our body that, we have to make sure that they have the ability to articulate correctly. And I'm going to talk about a little bit later when we get into our programming about a joint by joint approach. But if you have one joint not firing the right way, or you don't have enough mobility or stability at a certain joint, another joint is going to pick it up and have to compensate for it. So say if I have poor ankle mobility, something up the chain, since there's nowhere else for me to go, is something up the joint is going to pick up mobility that shouldn't. So that would be my knee, and that would be an increase for ACL tear. So joint proprioception or discovery. Joints tend to have more articular capabilities than what we actually use. A lot of our joint usage is because we play sports, which limit our ability to move in certain directions because some sports only require certain patterns. Also, we're sitting all day. We're in school, we drive, we sit to eat, so on and so forth. And I put up this map of an incomplete world. I didn't want to do the world is flat because we know that's not true. But as you see, this map is incomplete. This was before the complete discovery of North America. So for me, if we don't know something is there, how can we use it? How can we go, okay, I'm going to build range of motion in this certain area if I can't discover the rest of my joint or rest of my capsule? So active articulations is really just searching for more space. Is really a healthy alternative to stretching. A lot of people overstretch a joint to gain mobility, but it's really just flexibility and unusable space. So if we create space and then learn how to move through it, that's going to be very, very usable real estate that we're going to use in sport that can help prevent catastrophic injuries when we do access these undiscovered areas of our joint. I prefer to use axial rotations in cars. That's a concept that comes from FRC and Dr. Spina. What are axial rotations in cars? It's very simple. They're joint rotations where you put focus and controlled effort or irradiation, feeding forward tension throughout the body and moving through it. So for me, a very easy way to do this is I'm going to reach, and I'm going to try to create as much tension through that joint and through my effort as possible. Now, what will end up happening is the joint will start to free up, and you're actually using more muscles to try to find that space. So, you're going to pick up, motor units that you weren't using before in that joint, and your brain will become more aware of the space that it can use, and you can also start increasing that space. Another good thing that comes from this is being able to disassociate joints. So your brain can know the difference between your wrist and your elbow from your shoulder. All these joints should be able to move separately and independently without having to go to another joint to gain movement. So the whole goal here is to discover and develop mobility to the end range of the capsule. So this is a quote from one of my buddies named Lyle Danley, who's over at Stanford University. If we want guys to give everything they have during the season, night after night, we should use in-season resistance training to refill their coffers. Complex lift twice a week provide the neuromuscular feedback to allow a player to maintain awareness, control, and strength in a way that you can't get from just a warm-up. For me, this is absolute truth. If you don't use it, you lose it. So, on to the next slide. So next we're going to talk about cellular adaptation. This is everything we do is an adaptation. Sitting and riding in a car, becoming immobile, getting arthritis. These are all cellular adaptations that come over time, and we have to appreciate that we have control of this with our habits and our actions. Not all of them. So exercise adaptations. As you can see, this guy, doesn't do a lot of strength training, but yet he feels he has adapted to using resistance training. But when challenged with a physical task, the human body responds through a series of integrated changes in function that involve most, if not all, physiological systems. As I was talking, we're trying to integrate many different systems in our training. Movement requires activation and control of the musculoskeletal system. The cardiovascular and respiratory systems provide the ability to sustain movement over extended periods. When the body changes and engages in exercise several times a week or more frequently, each of these physiological systems undergoes specific adaptations that increase the body's efficiency and capacity. So the more you do something, the more, the better you get at it. And to keep this very simple, if I want to be a really good golfer, chances are if I don't go out to the links 2 to 3 times a week, I'm not going to be a very good golfer. I'm going to have a really high handicap, and I'm going to have to deal with it. But if I get a chance to go out to the golf course more often, chances are my shots will get better, my awareness of what I'm doing, my understanding of the game will improve as well. So I always bring this one up with me. I got this a long time ago from Mike Boyle, at least the idea of the picture. So we have to think about how we're training. Now there's 2 types of exercise adaptation that I'm going to include in this. One is the SAID principle, and the other one is the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS. So if you look at it, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, which one do you want on your team? Like if you're a power sport athlete, are you going to want the marathon runner or the sprinter? Again, these guys have adapted to stress. So their cells have produced and become what they are because of the exercise input they have. So what their continuous input is always going to adapt and affect their output. So the SAID principle is really specific adaptations for imposed demands. States the body will adapt to specific demands that's placed onto it. So if you're constantly lifting weights, you're going to adapt to that because the demands that you're putting on your body and for your cells to survive, they have to change. General adaptation syndrome is a term describes the organism's response to chronic stress. So we're talking about just repeated stress over time. The first stage is going to be the alarm reaction. Second is going to be resistance, where the body starts to fight back a little bit. The third is readjustment or exhaustion. So I prefer to look at the SAID principle more because the general adaptation syndrome can have just so many different waves and so many different patterns it can follow. But what I like about it is that there's also 2 ways you can go. Your body can readjust to the stress and no longer become alarmed to the stress you're putting under, or if it's too repeated or too high of an intensity or too frequent of a stress, your body will exhaust and shut down. So I use this because it's a more in-depth, more detailed way of looking at adaptation. So I put this up here because I thought it was funny, because as a baseball instructor and a performance coach, I really am trying to have you understand that if you're trying to get recruited, this is what your coaches will see. They will see, has his body adapted? Is this guy continuing to work? And say after a long season you stop working out, you may end up like the guy that doesn't have the physique in this pitcher that's going to win him an award. Now, if we're trying to get scholarships, and we're talking about athleticism or size, all these other guys are going to get the money, and this one guy he's going to miss out. So I think this is a very good slide to include. I don't know what that guy's exercise history is, but he's not winning. So keep going with exercise adaptations. Question to consider is, what adaptation am I going for? What am I trying to elicit? What do I want from my training? What am I trying to further develop? Now, we have to look at what qualities do we need, because there are some guys that are out there really, really strong, and we want to keep that. We want to keep building it. But what if they're slow? They're so slow because they're carrying so much mass, and they don't know how to use all their strength and all their mass because they don't fire enough motor units to get deep enough into their capsule to allow them a range of motion to stay healthy. So do I need to maintain or build this adaptation? So if someone who's really strong in season, for me, it's whatever you feel like you can do, because there's something called auto-regulation that we'll talk about. So if we have a kid that's come in and did 20 sprints at practice, I'm not going to fill that bucket anymore. He already did his sprint. So in season, what we'll do is have him come in, maybe hop on the bike and get his tissue warm, get a couple skips going. That's about it for his speed development. But if we get a guy that's, say he's not playing much, say he doesn't get the amount of reps other people do, I think we should treat him like he's more out of season than the guy that's in season, because while everyone else is playing and getting better at their sport, this guy could be getting better physically, which will also build his confidence and and his skill work when he goes to use it. In what way would you like to stand out? And I go back to this picture. That's not how you want to stand out. To me, I would want to be one of these other guys that are ready to go, that are ready to compete. So, you can look like a ball player if we're talking about that, or you can look like everyone else. So perception is reality. So what these coaches see is, that's what they get. Even if it's not true, maybe you're the best baseball player in the world, but if they see someone who's skinny, undersized, and doesn't look like they're going to have much potential, it's going to be hard for them to spin their coin on you to bring you to their university or draft you. Again, if you look like that. This quote comes from a buddy of mine named Will Franco at University of Maryland, strength coach for the baseball team and other teams. To quote him, "In season is not a time to maintain. If you are maintaining, you are not getting better. It is possible to improve performance in season through proper programming and auto-regulation." So this is where we talk about functional movement systems. This is a very, very useful screening system. Basically, we're looking at 7 different movements to determine the qualities of joint movement and certain exercise patterns. So today we're going to look at our fundamental movement patterns that we're going to use in exercise almost every lift or regularly. So the fundamental exercise patterns, the screen gives us insight on how to train, gives us an idea of someone's prerequisites. So can this person deadlift? Can this person clean? Or should this person focus more on cleaning up the joint and then retesting it later to see if now you gain the prerequisites? Also, it gives you a certain way that you can see instant changes through corrective exercises. The really cool thing is you just assess, you look at what patterns need improvement, you implement the corrective exercise, and then you retest, and if the qualities change, that's the exercise that you should use in prehab or in the programming. Exercise, it was invented by humans when civilization started limiting our physical vocations. So basically, everyone used to have some sort of physical task. So hunter-gatherer, we had builders, we had blacksmiths, we had things and people that moved for a living. Now, as technology, it's wonderful, but we have not caught up to the external changes that we have created in our own environment. So basically, what we need to do is we have to use exercise in order to clean this stuff up, unfortunately. So a really good way to do that is to implement movements that the human would have gotten centuries ago or millennium ago. So like I said, we use the joint-by-joint approach. We try to appreciate the abilities and capabilities and the actual task each joint is supposed to handle. This is Mike Boyle and Gray Cook idea. So when we train, we're not looking so much at muscle. We're looking at more movement-based or joint-based. So we'll tap into that a little bit later. And every exercise that we do has some total body element. We're not trying to break down just muscle by muscle. Now, if we're in a rehab setting where something needs a little isolation and some isometrics, we'll do that. But if we're focusing on just training the body, we're going to make sure a lot of it is 99% of it is going to be total body related. So in season, it's really easy to use because what this system does is if you're looking at breaking things down joint by joint, you're going to exercise each joint every day. So a lot of programming will follow the idea that we're going to break it down, and for example, back and bicep, chest and tricep, leg day, whatever that means. And we're going to hammer it. So the following day, you may not be comfortable using those joints, or should I say muscles. And and if you're a baseball player, you're going to be playing ball almost every day. And if you limit yourself to practice, or you can't go out there and have high intent during your practice, you may not be getting the most out of that practice that day, or you may have to alter your patterns, and that could lead to some compensatory actions, which could lead to pain or injury. So the way we do is we break it down into joints, and what we do is we emphasize a joint per day. So say our day one is going to be a deadlift. So we'll actually have a greater load that day, not necessarily volume, but more in the idea of we're going to load that pattern with more weight. And then every other exercise may be a little bit lower volume, or a little bit higher volume in reps, and a little less volume in weight. So that way, if you're looking at the overall load per week, each joint, each area of the body is going to have equal amounts of load, intensity, and tempo throughout the week. And if you look at it, it's going to be exactly the same reps, load, intensity per week as the muscle breakdown approach, where we go to back and bicep, but except it's just spread out. So we're talking about the reduction of soreness, reduction of movement abilities. We actually had a pitcher in here the other night who did a lot of benching and was wondering why his numbers were down. So for us, we go, okay, well, you worked out at school also, so you may have taxed that area, and that's where those are the reasons why you can expect to have a lower increase in velocity. Again, weekly volume remains the same. So fundamental exercise patterns. Life in sport is 3D. We're considering both. Our exercise is really just to increase our ability to be human and reduce the effects of sports that have on our body. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. So these fundamental exercise patterns, we need to appreciate that we're going to move in 3 dimensions, so we should exercise that way, as long as the prerequisites are there that we will get from FRC assessments and also from our FMS assessment. So basically, the exercise classifications we consider when we train athletes are bilateral, unilateral exercises, exercises done in the sagittal plane, frontal plane, and transverse plane. So the joint categories we break things down to are going to be upper horizontal or vertical push, upper horizontal or vertical pull, hip dominant, knee dominant, and then core, which is broken down into 4 different ideas. So one will be anti-extension, anti-lateral flexion, anti-rotation, and then you can make all those dynamic, which that would be the 4th. As you can see, if you can read this, very first one will be an explosive activity with a corrective. Second one will be a bilateral hip dominant, like a deadlift, horizontal press, FMS, or some sort of corrective that the athlete needs. Upper body push, single leg, quad dominant or knee dominant, thoracoscapular, glenohumeral work, and then at the end, core. So this is a quote from Chris Hayes, who is a really good strength coach, who just accepted a job at the Los Angeles Dodgers in their minor league system. During the off-season, development of physical capacities through strength training is vital to optimizing one's potential. Maintaining and even improving upon those qualities while in season are equally as important to the contribution of a long, healthy, and sustained level of high performance. So again, this is becoming repetitive amongst these strength coaches that we need to keep training, we need to keep going for more, even if we're not reaching as far to gain more. So the effects of sport on being human, this is something we need to consider when we train, because humans made sports. It's not a natural thing. Sports become very redundant in their movement patterns and can lead to compensation and down the road to decompensation. So what does sports do to our body? So this is from Terry Phillips at Driveline. They're a physical therapist out in Seattle, who we appreciate so much, and all the information they've put out for us to use. And Terry's a really smart guy, and we talk regularly about training. His quote is, "The baseball season is very long and stressful on the body. Continuing to train in season can drastically reduce the chance of breakdown as well as helping to improve performance." Okay, what does sport do to our body? Well, this is an example of GERD. So basically, we're looking at glenohumeral internal and external rotation, and we can compare the deficit between each side, and we also need to consider total motion. Sport is really made, it's man-made and has really no value on our primitive movements and our actual quality of life. For some, for a very small amount of people, it provides a living. Other than that, it's a hobby and a sport or a way to maybe get college paid for. Repetitive patterns and excess. So generally in one direction. So if I'm a baseball player and I say I'm a righty-handed thrower, right-handed hitter, all of my rotation is going to be done to the left other than the counter movement to get there. So what will happen is when my counter movement is going to be a little bit slower draw back, I'm going to be accelerating and torquing my body in high velocities to one direction. And nowhere in our change or evolution of man is there ever been an example where we need to throw things repeatedly, 100 to 200 times a day for survival? Usually it'd probably be one or two. We're either dead or we kill the object where we're throwing our stone at. So I look at throwing and rotational movements as ringing a towel. This is something I got from Alan Groover, who is now the Memphis Grizzlies physical therapist. And basically what he talked about at a PRI presentation for baseball is you have to look at the spine as like a towel. If you start ringing the towel to one direction, you're not going to get any more water out in that direction. And actually, you're going to feel tension and you're going to feel restricted range of motion going in that direction. So a way for us to really fix this is start working the other direction and building motion and strength in other direction. But before we do that, we have to have an appreciation for it and actually understand that that's happening. Footwear. Footwear's huge. I mean, we talk about these athletes wearing boots with spikes on them all day. And we wonder why they have foot or proprioceptive issues that, lead to further things. An athlete who wears cleats or their basketball shoes all day or however long they're practicing, they're going that long without true ground foot brain feedback, which is really huge for everything that we do. So it also elevates our stress. Competition's a great thing, but what happens when an athlete can't let go? What happens when after the game is over, they're obsessed with it, they can't let go, and their body continues to fight for more? And they continue to focus on it. It affects their sleep. It affects a lot of other qualities that are going to help them make changes in their health and in sport. Sport does not promote recovery or posture or appropriate breathing patterns. So it actually, when you get twisted in one direction, you actually become dominant on one side of your rib cage for breathing. It also affects joints. And realistically, it's hard on the body. So that's part of the reason why we're talking about in-season training. No post-play training after games to restore position or posture. For me, this is a big mistake. A lot of kids or athletes at the end of their competition will stop training. They'll go, okay, look, I'm tired. I don't feel like doing anymore. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go sit in the car and then go home and fall asleep. Well, your brain senses that. So if your brain is used to being twisted, it will find stability in that position. Like, again, you can expect to have some effects from that are not going to be positive for you. Now, there are going to be some structural changes to the body, like retroversion and a throwing shoulder. It's going to happen. You start whipping that ball around, there's going to be some bonius changes. There's going to be some wear and tear on it at different joints also. So this is something that, if not anything, this is the most important slide in the presentation, because this will really tell us how long these capacities or qualities will last if we don't train. So I got this from Isseren's book on block periodization. This research is done by Isseren and Lustig in 2004. So basically, this table represents how long each ability will last. So for instance, aerobic endurance will last 30 plus or minus 5 days. So anywhere from 25 to 35 days is how quickly you can lose endurance. Max strength is the same thing. To me, the big one here is speed. 5 plus or minus 3 days. So anywhere from 2 to 8 days is how quickly you can lose speed or power. So if you're a thrower and you're trying to, you're trying to throw fuel, or if you're a hitter and you're trying to hit bombs, if you're not constantly trying to, even at a very low volume, get your speed work in or get your bat speed work in or doing some sort of long toss, you're going to lose these qualities. And what's the point of, if you're trying to play in college or professionally or whatever, if you don't have these qualities, your career will be cut short, because this is what people are looking for, and this is what wins games, and this is what wins positions and jobs. So for me, this is why we train all year long. Now, again, we waive our intensities, volumes, workloads, whatever you want to call them. But to me, this says it all. So maintaining / building off-season progress. Okay, this is a quote from Zach Deshan from Texas Christian University. He's a strength coach for baseball and football. The biggest issue we see is a 2-step forward and a 3-step backward approach. They develop in the off-season. We get to the end season, they completely lose everything. They stop training cold turkey. They say they don't have time for it. I don't want to get sore. I'm playing too many games, and the excuses go on. For me, this is absolutely true. A lot of people stop training simply because they feel that other things are more important. Well, my message to those people are, you're delusional. So again, everything previous to this statement has been a support in why you need to continue to train, not only for performance reasons, but for health and posture reasons. So we look at a lot of things we look at in season are acute variables. So we're talking about tempos, loads, frequencies, also intensities, things of that nature. We also have to consider what buckets are already being filled. Am I already getting enough speed work in by doing sprints at practice? So in season, what we focus on is, because we play a power sport, we focus on lower volumes of power and speed work, but we still train it. We still condition it. So for us, instead of doing maybe 3 sets or 4 sets of it, we kick it down to 2. Or depending on your role on the team and how much you play, we may just keep you on an out-of-season program and just kind of waive things as your playing time changes. So a little equation here is velocity plus fatigue equals greater rate of injury. Here's a little site that I have from, you can go on the end of our citations and check out the research article, but findings from the present study indicate that exercise stimulating the physiological and mechanical demands of soccer match play produced a time-dependent alteration in sprinting mechanics. So basically, over time, the more and more sprints you do, the more your mechanics are going to change. And if your mechanics change, then our muscle firing patterns are out of order, which increase the likeliness for some injury. To follow on, to build off that quote, is another quote from that same article. Furthermore, decreased flexibility of hamstring muscle group was indicated during fatigue sprinting, with reduced maximum combined hip flexion and knee extension angle observed during the late swing phase of sprinting cycle. This combined with increased lower limb segmental velocity, potentially due to elastic recoil from the increased rectus femoris length observed earlier in the stride cycle, and increased anterior tilted pelvis with fatigue may increase strain on hamstring. So again, more and more sprints you do, on top of your fatigue, mechanical advantages change and go to mechanical limitations, which then puts stress on a certain muscle that has to take the leverage for a muscle that can't fire simply because the structure's out of position. We focus a lot on concentric phase. So that'd be like a 101 tempo or 201. So a concentric would be when the joints move away from each other. So 201 would be 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1. That's if you're doing a push-up or some sort of chest exercise. There's very little focus on eccentrics in our program. And the reason is because that's more of an endurance-based idea. And for me, that's going to, and from research and books I've read, it causes more micro trauma, and which increases soreness. Athlete is sore while they're at practice, they don't perform as well, which could limit the coach's perspective of them, blah, blah, blah. Strength focus is basically what we're heading at, because the one thing we know about strength is it protects you from certain injuries, it improves your speed, it improves your endurance. So strength work is going to be our main focus in season. For me, I'm a firm believer. I don't want to go past 6 to 8 reps. That's too much time under tension. It will cause soreness. It will also cause the human to start moving the weight a little more slowly, which again will cause more micro trauma and soreness. Sets vary depending on playing time, or what we call perceived is RPE, or their feel. So the next thing we talk about is our training loads, intensity, total sets. So again, this will all be altered depending on how the athlete feels that day. So we think more SAD than GAS, SAD principle versus general adaptation syndrome, simply because I want my athlete to stay adapted to their strength. I want them to continue to have and build on top of the things that they worked on all off season. So if I can keep them adapted to what we had worked on all off season, their performance qualities will stay through the roof, and we'll be having a good season as long as they perform their skills. I like to use some auto-regulation on myself when I train, which is either what we call a Morpheus device, Omega Wave, or HRV. It simply just runs your heart rates through certain algorithms that are built into the program that tell you your readiness to train that day. So either you're ready to go, you need to back off, or you need to do some sort of active recovery and keep the intensity low. The appropriately graded prescription of high training loads should improve the player's fitness, which in turn may protect against injury, ultimately leading to 1, greater physical outputs and resilience in competition, and 2, a greater proportion of the squad available for selection each week. So this is also a concept that you'll see in hockey is man games missed. So if their best players in hockey are not staying on the ice, the team is less likely to win. So our job as strength and conditioning coaches is to supplement the sport and keep that athlete healthy so that team wins regularly. If you don't have your best players in the field, good luck. So here's a little example of what our program may look like. In season, we're only going to do, say two sets of ladders, 2 sets of medicine ball work, and we may or may not jump depending on how the athlete's leg feels. We probably won't go any more than 3 sprints. If they've been doing sprinting during practice, then we'll back off of that. Our explosive work, we're still going to train that. It's, again, more like 2 sets. All of our correctives are going to be 2 sets. Our main lifts are going to be 3 sets, and then all of our accessory joint lifts are going to be 2 sets. Again, if you're not playing much, we'll just get after it and go a couple more sets. So things that can help recovery, and this is the last thing we're going to talk about, is so many people work hard, but so many people forget to recover hard. And what I mean by that is making sleep a priority, nutrition a priority, and other things. But for me, low intensity exercise is a great way to recover. So we're talking like active recovery, like walking, controlled articulated rotations, light biking, and swimming. As long as it really depends on what the athlete wants. The best way to go through this is have them put on a heart rate monitor and not exceed the low intensity readouts. Low intensity exercise trained rats had a significantly lower mean blood pressure than sedentary and high intensity exercise trained rats. Cardiac index and heart rate were significantly lower in low intensity exercise trained rats than sedentary and high intensity exercise trained rats. So pretty much high intensity exercise and being sedentary does not improve your cardiac output or your heart health, which all that helps promote recovery. And if you don't have that, again, all the stress that you put yourself through will likely go for either nothing or reduced results. Like I said, I use heart rate monitors with my training. Another thing that we use heavily for our recovery is breathing. After you go for an active recovery, go lay down, go breathe, go position yourself, get air moving in and out of your body. Meditation's another good one, because now it's a way to bring yourself down from that competitive nature and really focus on yourself and what's going on inside you and giving yourself some mental space. Another good one's contrast therapy, going from hot water to cold water, back to hot water. You can do that with a shower. Also, Epsom salt's a good thing for muscles and joint aches. My favorite one out there is the Morpheus Digital Coach. What it does is it's by Joel Jamieson. Check him out on 8 Weeks Out. That's his website, 8weeksout.com. Basically what it does, it takes your sleep numbers, it takes your exercise numbers, it takes your heart rate, and a few other qualities, and then puts them into a program and tells you how well you're recovering, and it also tells you whether you're recovered enough to put yourself through more intense exercise. Recovery needs to be mental, emotional, and physical. So you need mental release, you need to feel good about it, which is emotional, and then your body needs and your physiology needs to improve from it also. Work hard, recover harder. So these are our sites, and basically that's it. I appreciate your time watching. If you have any questions or if you're interested in the slides, please feel free to reach out. Again, thank you for all those who contributed to my knowledge and have contributed to this presentation in any way. Thank you guys, and see you next time.